welcome to the Greenstone Church Oral History Project. My name is Regina Williams, and today is Friday, November 4th, 2022, and we are in the Suzie Lee Lounge of the East Mount Zion Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio. I would just like to get started by asking that you please state your name and church affiliation, and if you don't mind, if you would spell your first and last name for us.
Sure. Good afternoon, Ms. Williams. My name is Patricia Hops, PatriciaHopps. I am a member of the East Mount Zion Baptist Church all of my life.
Thank you very much. And all of your life. Mm-hmm. This is where I get in trouble if I ask people how long you've been a member of the church sometimes.
Baptized in the year 1945.
Yes.
So it's better than 75 years that I've been a member here. Yes.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Some of our narrators are sensitive about telling their age, but I like the way you answered that question. Thank you so much. And can you tell us, please, a little bit about your early life? Your parents' names, and when and where you were born, and something, please, about the schools that you attended.
My mother's name is Leola Hammond. Mama had 7 children. I'll say the oldest of the second group. There are 10 years between my brother and me. We were all raised at East Mount Zion Baptist Church because Mama loved the church. She came to Cleveland from Georgia in the early 20s, and the church was located over right off of Cedar on the old church. I can't think of Frank Avenue, I believe. But we remember 103rd and Cedar. We came to Sunday school, we came to Bible school. We had plays, we were enriched by some of the women and men that would teach us how to dramatize certain things at Christmas and Easter and Mother's Day. Many of them have gone on. We had a Sunday school picnic in the old Garfield Park. We were given, what shall I say, an ice cream cup and a soda pop. Everybody got that, but you bought your basket lunch. Aside from church, I came up in the Cleveland public school system. I went to Observation Elementary. I went to Bolton Elementary. I went to Miles Standish Elementary. I went to Patrick Henry Junior High School, and I graduated in 1956 from Glenville High. Go Tar Blooders, yeah. I was baptized at East Mount Zion by Reverend Downs at the age of 7. I can't say that it was Mama's insistence, but we were coming to prayer, since this is all she knew was church. We were coming to prayer meeting on Wednesday. We were coming to the Sunshine Band on Sunday afternoon. We were coming to Wednesday night prayer service, communion when we had it at night, come to morning service, and then we come to church for communion in the evening. I graduated high school in '56, I think I already told you. And from then on, we were at the new church. So I have some stories about that if you want to ask me other questions. Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I want to know all the history. But there's one thing I'd also like to ask about your coming of age here at East Mount Zion Baptist Church in the sanctuary at East 103rd Street, and also the new facility, or the current facility here at approximately East 100th and Euclid Avenue. Can you recall the style of music that was used in the worship service?
Yes, we had the hymns. There was Miss Dupree, I believe was her name, and then there was Stella Hoyston. They were some that were very well known in the church. The choir stand was sitting up high behind the pastor. The organ and the piano were over to the right. And the choir just sang the hymns. I mean, we're not talking about rocking or anything like that, but Amazing Grace, Precious Lord, those hymns. Of course, the sanctuary wasn't that big. We faced Cedar Avenue. Nice, beautiful lawn, walk up the steps. And then behind the choir stand was a baptismal pool. So that's where I was baptized. The nice wall behind the whole sanctuary situation was another big room. Sunday school classes were held in there, maybe small meetings. And then there was this large basement. I believe there was the big kitchen, as usual. And then the one big room where the plays were held, and there were side rooms where we had Sunday school classes. But we enjoyed 103rd and Cedar.
All right.
And then we grew. So it was someone's vision, Pastor Downs, I'm going to say, that we would move to a bigger location.
Okay. And you said again you were baptized in 1945?
Yes.
Okay, so you had 10 years as a child in the 103rd Street.
Almost. Almost.
Okay, almost 10 years.
I was born in 38, so I was baptized in 45. Mama liked for us to be baptized. It was the commitment. But we were coming to Sunday school every Sunday and learning the Bible, coming to prayer meeting and learning to pray, coming and hearing the songs of Zion. It was only, this is the way it was supposed to be. We were all to be baptized.
Okay, thank you. And can you please describe for us, and I know you were just a child, the experience of joining the church, if you have memories of how that happened?
The only real memory I have, Miss Williams, is getting up from the seat. We didn't sit too close to the front. And when the doors of the church were open, coming down the aisle and sitting on the front row. The rest is history. I don't even remember if I had a testimony or other than being welcomed by the deacons at that time. And then, of course, the experience of the baptism, which was the very cold water. We had to dress in white robes, naturally, and white turbans, and baptize.
Okay. But one of the other things, related question, not necessarily on the script, related to the joining of the church and the baptism. Can you recall any of the hymns of invitation or baptism that would have been part of those experiences as well?
The one song I do remember, Come to Jesus. That was the song that we sang. The deacons, you know, with the extended, that come to Jesus just now. Come, he will save you. And it was like, you know how some of the hymns, our hymns anyway, it's just a repetition. You know, come to Jesus, he will save you, he'll deliver. But I do remember, come to Jesus just now.
And do you have any memories of the kinds of songs people would sing at the services for the baptism? Then or now?
Yeah, other than, I know it was the blood. Those were the communion songs. And of course, we had communion after baptism. And we were welcomed into the church after we were dressed and coming down. And it seems to me that that same ritual holds true now. Yeah. I know it was the blood, you know.
Okay, thank you very much. And then how soon after joining the church were you baptized? Was that within a matter of weeks? Were there classes before you could be baptized?
You know, Miss Williams, there were no classes at that time that I remember. I know as we came into the new church, there was a period called orientation. And I think they even asked if you wanted to be oriented since it wasn't done at that time. But I think there was a standard Sunday for baptism. So the exact date that I joined, I'm not clear. I'm sure it's on the church record, but the baptism was on that standard day for baptisms.
All right, thank you. And I want to ask, because I heard you say behind the choir stand was the baptismal pool. And so I'm assuming, and I hope I'm correct, but if not, you'll correct me, that you were baptized indoors rather than being baptized outdoors.
Baptized in the church, yes, indoors.
Okay. And did you tell me about how you would dress for the baptism?
We were dressed in white robes and a white wrap on our heads. And probably scared, beyond scared, but it was done. Okay. It was done.
And you were then about 7 years old?
About 7, yeah. I could look up the date to see if I was 7.5, but it's 7, 38 to 45.
All right, thank you. And again, I believe you mentioned that Reverend Downs, Pastor Downs, baptized you as a child. Okay. And thank you for sharing your memories of that experience. And are you a native of Cleveland, Ohio?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio. Yes, I am a native. My mom always told me, you were the only one of my kids that was born in a hospital. Everyone else was born at home. I happened to be born at the city hospital.
Okay. Yes, and you mentioned also that your mother migrated to the city of Cleveland.
Yes, from Georgia.
From Georgia. Did she ever tell you why the family decided to come here?
Well, I'm going to say a better opportunity. Mama had 7 sisters, and they all eventually wound up here in Cleveland. And 3 of them joined East Mount Zion Baptist Church.
And all within that same decade of the 1920s, or approximately in the 1920s?
Same within that, yeah. She joined in 22, so it seems like when she came, and she was the second oldest, so it seems like they kind of followed behind her, yeah.
All right, better opportunity. Did she ever mention anything about leaving, perhaps, an unpleasant sort of existence behind, but just to come to something better?
Just to come up north. Come up north, yeah. Leave the red clay and come up north.
Okay, thank you. And knowing then that your mother's siblings came to this part of the country about 100 years ago. Did you say 1922 for your mother's
It was about
migration?
22.
Okay.
Mama was born in 1902, so it was about 22, yeah.
Okay.
And I believe she had 2 children at the time when, yeah.
Okay, but coming here then about 100 years ago, perhaps for a better opportunity. But what is it about the city of Cleveland that let you know that this was a place that you could put down roots, where you could stay and not necessarily migrate to another area of the country?
For me specifically, you know, Sister Williams, I can only say following in my mother's footsteps. Cleveland's been good. It's a wonderful city to live in. I've always been able to have a job. I love my church as much as my mother. I love my church family as much as my mother loved her church family. And Cleveland's just a good place to be.
Okay.
At one time, were we the best location in the nation, and then they gave us another name that we won't talk about.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you also for giving me all this information about your schooling here in the city of Cleveland in the public schools within the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, CMSD. I had to make sure I had all of the initials correct. And then finishing up at Glenville
Yes.
Yeah. Go Tar Blooders.
Yes, go Tar Blooders.
Would you like to tell our viewers and listeners what a Tar Blooder is?
Do you know they just said go Tar Blooders,
Uh-huh.
and that's what we repeated. I happened to be in the marching band and
Okay.
Rooting the football team on and rooting the basketball team on. Go Tar Blooders.
Okay. But just the mascot or the name for the school symbol.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, as far as the church is concerned, I know you talked about your experiences going to Sunday school and then the dramatization of certain stories from the Bible in 𝐒𝐈𝐅𝐓𝐿 as a child and the people who taught you that. Were you also involved in any aspect of music ministry or other ministries within the church as a child or an adult?
As a child, the only other ministry was the Sunshine Band. Sister Betty Pope was a leader, beautiful, white-haired Christian woman, and several Sunday school teachers that I had, Sister 𝐘𝐒𝐒, Sister Lois Bowen, and they loved us, they taught us, they nurtured us, and it was all about the Bible, the Word of God.
Thank you. Now, Mrs. Hobbs, you also mentioned, but I think this was before we started recording, that you have memories of 1955, which is a red letter date in the history of 𝐒𝐈𝐼 because that's the year in which the congregation moved from the East 103rd location to the present location at East 100th, approximately in Euclid Avenue. But do you have any special memories of that period of transition, of leaving the old building and coming to the new location?
Other than there was much excitement. I did not make the march. I was in high school, getting ready to graduate, probably not thinking too much about marching over on Euclid Avenue, but everyone else was. And leaving a small church sanctuary, coming to this massive building that was beautiful inside, with the red carpeting and the red bench seats and the beautiful stained glass windows. And when you come into the front entrance, you see this beautiful pipes, the gold pipes of the organ. And we had opportunity to hear that very often. It was just an experience, a wonderful experience. And there was so much happening on Euclid Avenue, and for us to become a part of it, and also to become, well, the history says, the first black church on Euclid Avenue. What did I know? It didn't really affect me. It was going to be my church, and that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you for reminding us that there was a time in our history where Cleveland Clinic didn't own as much real estate.
Say it.
On Euclid
Say
Avenue,
it.
but that there were
Yes.
other things going on
Yes,
on
there
Euclid.
were.
Yeah, what are some of the other businesses or establishments, homes that were on Euclid Avenue in the mid-1950s when the church relocated here?
I don't remember homes so much as I remember there were stores. There was a drugstore. There was a bank. There was a women's clothing store. There was a shoe store. There was a bowling alley. There was a market, you know. Everything was going on Euclid at the time. Further down, there were the clubs for, you know, nightlife or whatever, movie theaters.
And if that was the Euclid Avenue of the 1950s, I must tell you, I've seen some pictures of Cedar Avenue.
Same thing on Cedar.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, on Cedar Avenue, there were many, many clubs on Cedar Avenue. Sometime we would have to walk past the clubs to get to 𝐒𝐈𝐼, but we made it. And they have since been removed. It's something, I tell you.
Okay. I'd like to ask you, please, about one business in particular, because this business was owned by someone who produced a lot of the photographs of Cedar Avenue in the 1950s, and his name was Mr. Alan E. Cole. Do you remember the Alan Cole Photography Studio? It was a home-based studio, and his motto was, "Somebody, somewhere wants your photograph." just curious about that, because that's one of the collections we have at the Western Reserve Historical Society. And Reverend Downs' picture is in there, several images of him, but just wanted to ask.
I don't remember the store per se, Ms. Williams, or you say he worked out of his home?
Yes,
Don't
near
remember?
99th Street. Okay.
Don't remember the name or the location.
All right, that wasn't on the script anyway. I just
Okay.
wanted to ask, but thank you
No
very
problem.
much. All right, because again, what you've shared so far just reminds me of how much the surrounding neighborhood has changed
Oh, absolutely.
since 1955, but thank you very much. So I want to ask also about religion, Mount Zion, and then the social history of the surrounding community. In addition to meeting the spiritual needs of members, do you recall that the church focused on providing social services such as job training and placement, or operating hunger centers or other support services like that for members and folks in the community?
In our current location, Ms. Williams, we have a program called Lifeline, whereby anyone who needs assistance in that area can sign up and get it. You can come in, drive in, pick up a package, walk in, pick up a package. At one time, we had a clothing store over on St. Clair called Lifeline Clothing. Members or whoever would bring clothing, the ladies there would separate it, be sure it was clean and displayed, where anyone could walk in. You needed a t-shirt, it was yours. You needed a pair of shoes and they fit, it was yours. There was no charge. The current Lifeline program is funded by East Mount Zion. Then we have, now we have the Greater Cleveland Food Bank, where we get assistance from them. And we are able to feed probably 150 to 200 families every month.
Well, thank you for that. And I had asked also about job training and placement services. Is that something that the church either provides now or provided at some point?
I was not ever aware of a job placement. We used to have, I believe one of our deacons is an ex-teacher, and I believe we would mentor young men. We did have a program called the Young Davids. That was like we had the Sunshine Band, we had the Young Davids. That kind of ended. We did have, but it was not sponsored by East Mount Zion. We would let Alcoholics Anonymous have a room here, and they would have their sessions. And I don't believe that is anymore. And I don't know if that happened just before COVID or not. But COVID kind of cut off a lot of things. That I guess I'm in the present now as opposed to in the old East Mount Zion. I really don't recall any such programs, and if they were going on, I'm probably just a little too young to remember that they were available. We were Sunday school and worship service and Sunday school picnics and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing information about your choice to remain in Cleveland.
Oh, yes.
Since your mother's and your aunts and
Yes.
other relatives' migration to this part of the country beginning in the 1920s. But one of the things that you said in response to my question about why Cleveland and why now was that you've had a good life in Cleveland and you always had a job.
Yes.
So in addition to your busy church life and your busy work life, did you have time for a family?
Ms. Williams, I have raised 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. My oldest has since gone on. He died at the age of 47. But my youngest son and my 2 daughters went on. My youngest son went on to college and now lives in Evanston, Illinois. But they all came up in this church, let me just say that. My oldest daughter, baptized here She moved away from the church and then had to come back and be restored. So this is her church home. My youngest daughter, she went away to college and came back, but has not, she calls herself a member, but she doesn't attend as often as she should. Mm-hmm. But they're all East Mount Zion babies.
Okay, 2 sons and 2 daughters.
2 sons and 2 daughters.
Okay. And would you like to tell us about their father, Mr. Hops?
My husband is a member, well, he was a member of St. James back in the day. We actually met in school, high school. And then he went off. There was not a war, but he joined the service. And when he came back, we reconnected. And he proposed. And I accepted. Thus, the beginning. We will be married 66 years in February of 2023. It's been a good ride. Naturally, we all face some challenges, physical, fortunately nothing mental, but we're still ticking. Everything still works, if I could say that. Mm-hmm.
And were you married here at East Mount Zion?
We were married at the parsonage by Reverend Downs. I had on my beautiful old pink dress, and he had on his beautiful black suit. So it was just Reverend Downs, my mother, and Mrs. Downs, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then we had the reception at my house. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think you're the first narrator to mention the parsonage.
Yes, now, over on East Boulevard, beautiful place.
Okay, so it was not located near the church?
No, not in the physical church, no.
Yes, oh, okay.
They had a home on East Boulevard, and we called it the parsonage. Okay. Reverend Downs and Marion Downs lived there. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. And pink, and the bride wore pink.
The bride wore pink.
Was there something special about that color?
No, when I went to look for a dress, I saw it and I liked it. And I said, that's it. So it came home. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked because our Vice President, Kamala Harris, wears pink and green. And I was just curious if it had anything to do with a sorority.
No, no Greek. I did not attend college. All of my, I graduated from high school, and like I said, Cleveland has been good to me. I've always been able to get employed. Much experience with people that were good and didn't mind sharing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. A blessing, a blessing.
Okay. Would you like to share information about some of the wonderful places where you've worked here in the city of Cleveland?
I worked for the first black bank in Cleveland that was founded by John Bustamante. First Bank National Association. I think before its demise, there were maybe 3 branches. And I was fortunate enough to come up through the ranks, being a teller, being an assistant manager, and then eventually manager of one of the branches of First Bank. After First Bank closed, I worked for Parkview Federal. Became a manager there, worked at several branches, downtown in the Terminal Tower, out at Beechwood, met many wonderful people. They taught me a lot. After Parkview Federal, I retired. I decided I wanted to retire at the age of 62. I was getting tired of banking, the rigid rules. So I retired, signed up for my Social Security, and then went back to work as an independent contractor. Bills still had to be paid. And then I finally retired out of Parkview. And I'm currently retired, happily retired. My sister, the one just under me, had a small business. And when she died in 2018, she left that business to me and my younger sister. So that is my part-time job. We're still running that business. It's a small plumbing business, HVAC, and that kind of keeps me busy, keeps me up to date on the computer and these new iPhones and this texting business, which I had to get familiar with. Being an old schooler, there was a lot I had to learn, Miss Williams, so coming along.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Do you have an iPhone?
Yes, I do.
Oh, smartphone. Yeah, okay, thank you. And I don't think you're an old schooler at all, but thank you for sharing the technology update. The phones have changed over time.
Yes, they have. Yes, they have.
My goodness. I remember when phones had dials.
Yes.
And now they have touch screens. So, and there is a learning curve. We do have to keep up.
Yes, we do, Miss Williams. I think my kids, they just said, you gotta. So I said, okay, I'll do the best I can with this brain. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask also about your children and their coming of age in the church. You talked about some of the things that you did as a child, following the lead of your mother. But were they active in the children's ministries?
I became like my mother. Sunday morning, we go to Sunday school. If I can't take you, Aunt Josie will take you. My sister Josie was a superintendent of the junior department at one time, and she too was bringing her boys. And like I said, when I couldn't come, she'd pick up my kids. But my youngest, Lisa, my second youngest, Vanessa, and Keith and Daryl had to come to Sunday school, either by me or by my sister Josie. They were active in Sunday school. They had their recitations for, Mother's Day, Easter, Christmas. Most of them had the stage fright. But when they became, say, old enough to say, okay, Mommy, that's enough, I didn't force. They were all baptized. As far as I'm concerned, they were saved. And here we are. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But they did come up in East Mount Zion.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to ask, since you have fond memories of joining the church in the 1940s and remaining through the 1950s and that migration from Cedar to Euclid Avenue, you shared a little bit about changes in the neighborhood with the kinds of establishments that were on Euclid and also on Cedar. But that was also an important time in our history when race relations were evolving as well, especially in the decade of the 1950s with the beginning of the civil rights movement. Were you aware in the 1950s, and I know you were in high school and preparing for the world of adults, but were you aware of the changes in race relations at that time as well?
Miss Williams, as I think back, I did not let it affect me, if I could say that. I don't think I involved myself with any of that. When I went to work at Parkview, there were some, you run into some challenges with being probably the only black manager at that time. I was not treated unfairly. To my knowledge, if I was treated unfairly, I didn't know. But I was paid the same salary that they were paid and had the same benefits that they had being on the job. I think it's only here within the last maybe 10, 20 years, I'll say 20 years, I'll broaden it, that I let race relations and I'm not going to say affect me, because they still don't. We're treated unfairly. I don't think we'll ever be treated fairly. I believe that God is in control, and when it's time for some of these things to change, they'll change. But people are hard-hearted and hard-headed and don't know Jesus. And I just think that makes a difference. I just think that makes a difference. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mrs. Hobbs, I'd like to ask you about something else that you mentioned earlier related to your career in banking, and that's the name of one of your early bosses, Mr. John Bustamante.
John Bustamante, the man. He stepped out there and said, I want a bank, and I want it to be a black bank, and that's what it was. He made his mistakes, but he had many, just about every officer was black. Much of the help was black, but then it still failed. I mean, you know, there were things that happened that probably shouldn't have happened, and it failed.
And that happens sometimes.
Could happen to a white bank.
And it has.
And it has.
Yeah.
So see, but that was his dream. That was his dream. And he was a generous, good-hearted man, and he had his dream.
Okay.
He had his dream. He realized it.
Yeah, one of the things that I can recall, I didn't expect his name to come up, but so I'm doing this without notes. And this is not on the script either.
Okay.
But one of the things I recall about Mr. Bustamante is that he was an attorney.
Yes.
And that he was also good friends with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And just wondering if you ever had the opportunity to speak with him about his friends' leadership in the modern civil rights movement, the church-based civil rights movement.
Other than his involvement, which we all knew about, no, he and Reverend Moss, many other names that escape me at the moment, but Jesse Jackson, they were all, you know, rubbed elbows with one another.
But thank you for introducing his name to this discussion.
Yeah, he was something.
I wanted to ask also about Reverend Downs and his involvement, if you were aware of any of that, his involvement or his thoughts about the civil rights movement, especially as it relates to Cleveland's history in the 1960s.
Ms. Williams, I just don't recall him being involved in any civil rights. Reverend Downs, he was quite a figure, you know, and he loved his church. I remember one year, I was a teenager, they had these National Baptist Congresses, and being a member of the Sunday school, he drove in this big Lincoln, 3 of us to Virginia. Lois Sanders, Doretha Ashley, and myself. We were delegates, so to speak. So we had opportunity to go to Richmond, Virginia, to meet ministers and teachers and just learn and grow. Hear the messages that all these young ministers, and he supported the young ministers because I'm sure somebody supported him to get him where he was, yes.
Okay. So was that an annual affair then or was that just a once in a lifetime opportunity? It continued?
Well, the Sunday School Congress has gone on. I mean, National Baptist Sunday School Congress.
Yes.
I don't know if we're so active now with COVID, but that was an annual event, visiting different cities, different classes, different styles of preaching, hearing the different choirs, the drill teams. Then they introduced the pantomiming, and just a glorious celebration. Just good to be a part of it, to learn and grow and see what was going on, because they came from across the country, Texas, Oklahoma, New York, upstate New York. Just a grand fellowship, Ms. Williams.
Okay.
A grand
And so you were involved for more than 1 year?
Yes.
In the Congress itself?
Yes.
Okay.
As a child, I went from the old East Mount Zion. That was my introduction to it. I couldn't really participate because I was just being shown. This is what we do. This is what happens. Then I went with Reverend Downs. I also had the opportunity to be a delegate while we were here. Went to Columbus and, yeah.
Okay. And Mrs. Hobbs, if, again, I know you can recall the 50s because you talked about the Tarbletter experience and the Welcome to the World of Work experience and people associated with those early jobs. But when I think of the 1950s, again, related to the civil rights movement, if you're not an activist, there are some things happening that, that everybody, unfortunately, knew about, including the lynching of Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi in 1955. And because that's the same year in which the church is moving on up to Euclid Avenue.
Euclid Avenue, yeah.
I'm wondering, do you also remember the Emmett Till lynching and the Jet magazine photo of his dead body?
We remember the Jet magazine photo. The whole situation, just horrible. But somehow or other, we just didn't talk about it. We looked at it, we listened to what had happened. I remember the Huff riots here. I lived at the time and still do up on 149th and Kinsman. And the shooting and the bombing and the police brutality and things that were going on that side of the town. And here I'm on the other side. Not really afraid, but you know, you don't trust the police, you don't trust your neighbor. It just wasn't a good time, the Huff riots.
And since we've moved on to that next decade, we're in the second half of the 1960s now when we talk about Huff. And I'm thinking now about East 79th Street and Huff and what it looks like now. Because there is a monument to that riot. But can you tell me a little bit of, again, if you weren't afraid, what was happening beginning there at 79th and Huff? And I think that was the long, hot summer of 1966.
Yeah, there was the looting. You know, my husband, I think I don't know if he knew Harlell Jones or if just knew of him, you know. But that name came up quite often. They're bombing this store, you know, don't go out after a certain hour, you know. You got to stay safe. We didn't arm ourselves. We didn't. I mean, we stayed away from the neighborhood. Drove through and saw the devastation later and just kind of felt pitiful.
Do you know what
sorry.
The mood was? And I'm going to ask this question because you told me where you lived. And I know Kinsman, and I know a little bit about Chagrin. But there was a Kinsman bus that used to go to 159th Street. And I think that was like the borderland.
That's it.
So, and then it became Shaker Heights.
Shaker Heights.
But you're very close to the borderlands.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, you know, when you have so much of your life that's sort of centered in this part of Cleveland on the east side, Cedar Avenue, Euclid. I mean, you can walk from Cedar Avenue. But now you're going way up Kinsman to 149th. Was that a major move? Did you move in stages or did you go directly to Mount Pleasant? That's still Mount Pleasant, right?
Still
East
call it Mount Pleasant.
49th Street.
Yeah. Trying to think, where did we live before we moved? I know we lived down here on Chester. I lived on Chester because there was a period when we walked to church. It was just an opportunity to purchase a home. At that time, it was rent with an option to buy. At that time, President Kennedy had just been assassinated, and that's right. We stood on the front porch and talked about it. I was expecting my first daughter, born in 56, 55. When was Vanessa born? Yeah. And we've been there ever since, Miss Williams. We've planted ourselves there, not thinking about leaving.
So with all this going on in the world, and the baby's coming in 55, 56, I'm asking you about the civil rights movement, but you know, you're moving on. You're becoming a mother.
Right.
You've just become a wife.
Right.
And yeah, it's a lot to think about when the
Yeah.
world is changing that way and you're starting a family. But with the Kennedy assassination in 1963, and the only way I can remember that's the year one of my sisters was born. But in 1963, again, major year, the year in which Dr. King delivers his I Have a Dream speech on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and that's August. And then September, we have the bombing of the church and the 4 little girls die. But you're still building your family, and you're almost in the suburbs, and taking advantage of opportunities that are available to some Black families in Cleveland. But again, I just have to ask, with so many challenges, were you optimistic about things getting better at some point, or did it still feel like a struggle?
Miss Williams, you have to think that it would get better for those coming behind you. I feel, and I'm sure you can see, I feel that we are doing better than my mother did. My mother was a struggle. She divorced my dad, and it was a struggle for her to take care of these 6 kids by herself. But the older ones helped her to take care of us who were in the back. I think the reason we did not become involved is we would read the papers. There was a Cleveland Press, there was a Plain Dealer, I don't remember when the Call Post came into existence, but we had that, we had our Jet, we had our Ebony. We had all of this Black information that would keep us up to date about the struggle without us getting involved. I believe I told you I'm a quiet person. Sometimes I wonder how I became a manager, because I don't like the front seat. I like the middle row or the back seat. So through it all, I'm blessed.
Mrs. Alps, we talked briefly about your move to East 149th Street in the Mount Pleasant community. Can you tell us a little bit more about that community and what it was like as far as diversity within the community and different demographics, what that was like in 1963 approximately?
Yes. I got my dates mixed up there earlier. I had myself back in high school. But yes, when we moved, I believe I had stated earlier, it was a situation rent with an option to buy. Miss Williams, there was a doctor's office on the corner, Dr. John Lewis, Dr. Ford, they were Black doctors. Many of the neighbors were still white, but you could feel there was this migration, they were, a lot of the Italian families, they were leaving the community. There was a hardware store, viable hardware store. There was a corner store where you could actually go and buy groceries. Gas station, not too close by. Barber shop. But you were comfortable. Everything wasn't boarded up and torn down and broken windows. Now on the corner, there's a daycare, which is becoming very dominant in our community. There's one on my corner and one on 153rd, I believe. And then there's going to be a bank about 6 doors down, up closer to Chagrin. Market, it's still a lively community, but it doesn't look the same. That's all. The whole fabric has changed. Just a different color, different fabric. But it's all Black. All Black.
Would you describe it as a nice neighborhood in the 1960s?
From my viewpoint,
Yes.
my personal opinion, it's still a nice community. Still a nice community. You have good people that have decided to stay. Some outsiders come in and do damage and then they're gone, but we're still there, not looking to leave.
All right,
here
so
for the
nice
long
in the
haul.
60s and
Yes.
nice 60 years beyond that.
Yep.
All right.
Still looking to stay there. Gonna hang in.
All right, thank you. And today, in this era of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, are you optimistic about the future? And are there any messages of hope and encouragement that you would offer to young people today?
I'm going to be optimistic about the future. Sometimes my husband says, oh, you're just a pessimist. You don't believe. Sometimes you can be pessimistic. I think you have the right to be. But I'd like to think that it will get better. It will get better. The struggle has been so long. But it's going to take more than one person. It's going to take some unity. It's going to take, let's stop the backstabbing and the greed. Let's move forward where we can all have something, a piece of, what is that expression about? I didn't get my 40 acres and a mule. Maybe you won't get your 40 acres and a mule, but maybe you can make some contribution that will make it better for the generation coming. If we're not optimistic, Ms. Williams, we might as well just plop down to become do-nothingers.
And in that process of making things better, are you convinced that there will be a special role for Black churches? Perhaps in the same way that the Black church, especially in the South, was the foundation of the civil rights movement during Dr. King's day. Do you think the church will have a similar role in transforming the society in our time?
The church is shrinking, to me. Ms. Williams, the church isn't what it used to be. People don't flock in on Sunday morning, running to worship and sing and pray. They just aren't. And even virtually, sometimes that responsibility is shirked. I know I hear the trustees say, thank you for you all. People are still giving. But that total involvement, I just don't see it. I don't see it anymore, Ms. Williams. I don't want to be a naysayer, but I listen to Brother Jesse and the other ministers, and as they evangelize on the street corner, sometimes people just turn a deaf ear. They don't want to come to church. They don't even want to accept Jesus. I mean, they make it plain. You don't have to come in. Just accept him in your heart. And live the good life. Read your Bible, pray every day, walk the talk, talk the walk. But that doesn't mean we still can't pray that will happen. We continue in prayer that, better days ahead. Yeah.
Okay. And on that note, on that optimistic note, at least that's what it sounded like to me.
What?
A note of optimism, that there are better days.
There got to be better days. You got to keep hope alive. Who said that, Reverend Jack? You got to keep it alive.
And then with that, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with the Greenstone Church Oral History Project. And thank you for giving us your written consent to share your story with the world.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams, for this opportunity. I hope someone will see and feel the same joy that I feel for being not only a part of the community, but a part of the body of Christ.